Just this past weekend, Nigeria, which is one of the world's largest democracies, postponed what would have been their sixth national general election due to logistical concerns. The elections are now set to take place on February 23, 2019. The two frontrunners in the election, current President Buhari and his main opponent Atiku, claim to be just as surprised and upset at this news as the rest of the civilian population. If these elections do end up taking place on the 23rd, voter turnout will be much less than it would have been if they were carried out on the original date. Many citizens had to travel back to their hometowns and do not have the means of making the trip again for the 23rd. More than just their financial well-being, they are also risking their safety in order to vote, as the militant group Boko Haram is widely present in Nigeria. It was only a few days ago that they claimed responsibility for the murder of a Nigerian governor who was heading to a rally a few days before the scheduled elections. President Buhari has now given police and military permission to be ruthless with anyone who is tampering with or preventing the elections from happening. In order to understand the dangers behind such a delay, it is important to look at Nigeria's long history of corruption and military rule. Nigeria is one of the younger democracies in the world. They did not gain independence from British colonial rule until 1960 and were not able to establish a stable regime until 1999. Prior to 1999, Nigeria suffered a number of military coups and a civil war. In fact, there were 3 different republics of Nigeria, each with a different constitution and each overthrown, until 1999 when they finally created the Fourth Republic, which is still in place today. The First Republic was established in 1963 and established a Nigerian parliament. This came to an end in 1966 with Nigeria's first military coup, followed by a 4-year-long civil war, followed by years of military rule. The Second Republic was established in 1979 and put a presidential system, much like that of the United States, into practice. This republic was overthrown by the military in 1983 due to accusations of corruption and incompetence. 10 more years of military rule followed. The Third Republic was established in 1993. Elections took place that year but were later annulled on the accounts of corruption, which threw the country into chaos and yet another period of military rule. Finally, in 1999, the Fourth Republic of Nigeria was established and remains in place today. Nigeria is officially a federal, presidential, representative democracy with executive, legislative, and judicial institutions. The president is the head of state and government, and the legislative branch is made of the bicameral National Assembly. While they have seen peaceful transitions of power under this republic, Nigeria is still not a fully liberal democracy. Although Nigeria has the same institutions as highly functional democracies such as the United States, Nigeria faces many obstacles to democracy. One such obstacle is corrupt leadership. Nigeria's government is plagued by clientelism and insane amounts of wealth. Nigeria has been often referred to as a kleptocracy, as trillions of dollars have gone from the government to private individuals through public officers. This type of corruption not only leads to immense poverty and low concern for inequality, but also restricts the government's ability to fight Boko Haram, which only leads to further instability and lack of trust in the government. If Nigeria is ever to be a liberal democracy with free, fair, and frequent elections, this corruption must be stopped.
Venezuela has been in turmoil for some time now, though the recent actions of current President Nicolas Maduro have further eroded the already waning democratic institutions that were put into place during the Bolivarian Revolution. Maduro has been Venezuela's president since he was first elected in 2013 by a narrow margin after the death of former President Hugo Chavez. Maduro was re-elected in a controversial election in May of 2018, in which most opposition candidates were either prevented from running or boycotted the race altogether. Though he won the election with 68% of the vote, several countries dispute these results and have called on the opposition leader Juan Guaido to step in as interim president. However, Cuba, China, Iran, and Turkey do in fact recognize Maduro's presidency as legitimate. Recently, Maduro has seized control of the government, declaring himself president and taking steps to insulate himself from being held responsible for the damage that his authoritarian bent is causing. By ousting non-government loyalists and installing his own cronies and associates in various institutions, Maduro has effectively destroyed any semblance of a democracy in Venezuela. The leader of the opposition-controlled National Assembly, Juan Guaido, is who many Venezuelans are calling on to rescue the country from Maduro, or as they refer to him, El Usurpador. Though he is relatively unknown, Guaido, who is 35 years old, was elected to the National Assembly in 2011. After Maduro was sworn in for his second term, the National Assembly officially claimed that the presidency was vacant because of the dubious conditions under which the previous election was held. Guaido and the Assembly cite the country's own constitution in arguing that if the presidency is vacant, it gives the Assembly power to install an interim president. The reaction from the Trump White House has been threefold. First, they immediately recognized Guaido as interim president. Second, they placed sanctions on Venezuela's state-run oil company over concerns from Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, among others, that it may be used as a, quote, vehicle for corruption and embezzlement. Lastly, the U.S. has sent humanitarian aid, but it has been held up at the borders by military forces loyal to Maduro. All of this political turmoil has real, tangible effects on not only the Venezuelan economy and government, but the Venezuelan people, as they struggle to afford basic staples and food items as a result of hyperinflation and the general scarcity of food and goods. This clip shows Maduro giving a speech in response to comments made by President Trump. The Trump White House has officially condemned Maduro and chosen to recognize Guaido as the legitimate president. After Trump declared this, Maduro gave U.S. diplomats 72 hours to vacate his country.
Cuestionando el derecho de nuestro país libre de adoptar las ideas del socialismo humano, cristiano, de nuestro socialismo, casi con un discurso al estilo nazi para prohibir las ideologías. Donald Trump quiere prohibir las ideologías, la diversidad política y quiere imponer el pensamiento único de los supremacistas blancos de la Casa Blanca. El miércoles llega 300 toneladas de ayuda y asistencia humanitaria de Rusia legalmente llegan por el aeropuerto de Maiquetía, convertidas en medicina de alto costo para la ayuda del pueblo. Eso sí, la hemos pagado con nuestra mano ahí, con dignidad, de Rusia, de China, de Turquía, del mundo entero.
In this clip, recorded on January 23rd of this year, Juan Guaido declares himself acting president, directly challenging the power of Maduro. Maduro has responded by accusing Guaido of being a ploy by the U.S. and stating that, quote, he is the constitutional president and will remain so.
Guaido, amigo, el pueblo está contigo.
Juro asumir formalmente las competencias del Ejecutivo Nacional como el presidente encargado de Venezuela. Para lograr el cese de la usurpación, un gobierno de transición y tener elecciones libres. Si así lo hiciere, que Dios y la patria lo premien, sino que os condenen. Ante Dios Todopoderoso, Venezuela, el respeto a mis colegas.
As the international community continues to monitor the events unfolding in Venezuela, one thing remains clear. The Venezuelan people deserve a leader that will hold their interests above anything else.
Mauritania is a country located in northwest Africa. It is a highly centralized Islamic republic with authoritarian ruling, as well as strong religious and cultural tradition. Mauritania gained independence in 1960 from France, as it was formerly a colonial territory. Since then, most presidential elections have been the result of coups d'etats. In 1964, the first president, Mukhtar al-Dara, introduced an authoritarian regime, but was later overthrown in 1978. In 1991, a formal constitution was written and approved. It included some elements of democracy, including the right of all citizens above 18 years old to participate in elections, as well as the introduction of a multi-party system. In 2006, voting approved a constitutional change which limited the presidency to a two-term limit of 5 years each, as well as provisions for a civilian government with an executive branch, Senate, and National Assembly. The government of Mauritania does have all three branches, including a very strong executive branch consisting of an elected president who serves as the head of state and a president-appointed prime minister who serves as the head of government. There is a judicial branch with an active Supreme Court in which judges are appointed by the president. The legislative branch consists of two houses, a Senate and a National Assembly, but most of the power is concentrated in the executive branch. In 2007, the presidential election was won by Sid Ould-Sheikh Abdali. The following year, in 2008, a military coup overthrew Abdali, who was the first democratically elected president after he attempted to dismiss several high-ranking military officials. The leader of the coup, General Mohammed Ould Abdelaziz, was elected in his place. During Abdelaziz's rule, many leaders of the opposition, as well as human rights activists and journalists, have been arrested and punished for being considered too extreme and dangerous to the culture and values of Mauritania. Human rights in Mauritania have always been a major concern, as the country's strong cultural and religious beliefs have led to the continuation of slavery, force feeding known as le bleu or gavage, and female genital mutilation. Many believe that the military coup in 2008 reverted the country back to more traditionalist cultural practices. Female genital mutilation, or female genital cutting, is a practice involving the partial or total removal or injury of the external female genitalia. Approximately 66% of the female population in Mauritania still undergoes the practice of female genital mutilation. It is a religious and cultural practice that aims to decrease sexual desire and pleasure, maintain familial social standing, and serve as a rite of passage into adulthood for women, although it occurs predominantly among infants. Gavage is the practice of force-feeding young girls as young as 5 years old to the age of 15. It is prominent mostly among Arab families, especially in rural areas. Mauritania ranks number 1 in countries that celebrate female obesity. Gavage is typically performed at fattening farms or in fattening huts by older women or family members. Young girls are forced to consume thousands of calories per day in the form of camel's milk, goat's milk, couscous, and animal fat. Due to the continual drought which plagues the country, the use of animal steroids, antihistamines, and other chemical and pharmaceuticals have been used as a means of increasing weight with dangerous side effects, including death. The purpose of this practice is to make the young girls appear to be older than they are and to look more desirable, so that the family can marry her off at an earlier age. Practice of gavage has reportedly increased in prevalence from 50% in rural areas and 30% in urban areas prior to the 2008 military coup to 80% throughout the entire country. Authorities have said that they are working to end the prevalence of force feeding within the country. However, no measures have been produced in terms of legislature or campaigns. Mauritania did pass the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which would protect against female genital mutilation and female genital cutting, and marriages involving child brides. However, the interpretation of domestic law cannot prevent unofficial religiously sanctioned marriages. The most effective current legislature protecting against these practices is in Mauritania's constitution and the Penal Protection Code for Children. Article 13 prohibits torture and cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment of human beings, which both of these practices could be considered. However, there is little enforcement of these laws as the cultural interpretation of the practices varies. In 2005, the government of Mauritania ratified the Penal Protection Code for Children, which officially criminalized the practice of female genital mutilation and female genital cutting on minors. This year, in 2019, new elections will take place sometime between April and June. It appears that Abdelaziz will step down from presidency. However, most likely he will still have significant control if his likely predecessor wins the election and he maintains his military influence. The main obstacles to change within the country include the vast desert, which increases the difficulty of enforcing any kind of laws, extreme poverty and famine plaguing the whole country, and the strength of cultural and religious tradition throughout the country. Opposition parties will be participating in the elections, which is a step towards functional democratic election that will hopefully lead to a further push away from the authoritarian rule with strong military presence that will lessen the harmful traditional values, including the practice of slavery, female genital mutilation, and gavage.